Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Audit Committee on the date of March 19th. I'd like to give a special welcome as well to our citizen appointments, and welcome to your first meeting, and we look forward to great ideas and your engagement, and thank you very much for volunteering your time and helping out the City of Brampton. Members of Council, we are at the approval of agenda. Item 1, are there any additions or? We have none. Can I get a moved of the agenda? Moved by Councillor Santos. All in favor? Carried. Declarations of interest under the Municipal Act. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? No. Consent, we have no items of consent, and we go on to item 4, our first presentation by the Director regarding Corporate Fraud Prevention Hotline update. Welcome, Fruzen. Thank you.
Through the chair, if you will indulge me, I'd like to introduce the internal audit team prior to my presentation. So these reports are lengthy, and there's a lot of work that goes into presenting these materials to Audit Committee. And I believe on March the 5th, I said it's not just me, there's a whole team that stands behind me, and I'd like to introduce them all. So first, I'd like to introduce Sabrina Cook, who's been with the city since September of 2017. Sabrina is our Research and Administrative Services Coordinator. She has experience with international aid organizations, UN organizations, the Norwegians People Aid, and Doctors Without Borders. Sabrina supports us with research and report writing. Next is Gail Constantine, who joined the city in October of 2017. She has over 30 years of experience in audit with public and private sector organizations. She has worked with the Ontario government, Toronto Community Housing, and the City of Toronto. She's also spent 7 years in the UAE. Also, we have Richard, who joined the city in April of 2018. He is our IT auditor. He also has experience doing operational audits, so he serves a dual purpose by being able to do both. Richard also has 30 years of experience with organizations such as Alliance Atlantis, CAA, and Davis and Henderson. Ella Keela joined the city in November of 2018 as a senior advisor. She has over 30 years of experience as an auditor, and most recently as the vice president of enterprise risk management at OLG. She has a lot of public sector experience and comes to us also with experience from PricewaterhouseCoopers, CIBC, and the CICA. Darshan Janda is our most recent acquisition. He joined us in February of 2019. And he has 14 years of experience, most recently with Molson Coors and prior with Canada Post Corporation. He has gone to school at York University. He has a CPA, a CIA, and he has done all types of audits as well. Thank you.
Fantastic, great team. Thank you very much.
So thank you to the team. And I'll get to the presentation now. So I had provided Audit Committee with an update on fraud, and given that it is a new committee, I thought it would be the right time to provide another update. So some of the material will be repetitive, but I wanted to make sure that all the same information was shared with all of Audit Committee. So in thinking about fraud and the significance of fraud, I went to the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners and their 2018 report to the nations. So they do a global study, which is based on 2,690 organizations. The government edition is a subset of the global, and this is based on 364 cases of fraud internationally. And as you can see, the percentage of cases for local government is 31%, with a median loss of 84,000. This highlights the significance of fraud across the world, pretty much. So I wanted to highlight how important this matter is, not just for me, but for the city. When we look at the detection methods for fraud, it's no surprise that tips are number one. And when we look at the subset of government organizations, it's sitting at 45%. When we look at the subset of Canadian organizations, it's 32%. And this, again, is still based on the 2018 report to the nations. So while we have all the other pieces in terms of being able to detect fraud, having tips is clearly the most common detection method. And when it comes to tips, 54% of tips come from employees. The means by which they report the tips, it's telephone, web-based, mail, letter, email. We have all of those forms with our current hotline. But again, to me, when I look at these numbers, I look at how important it is to have this vehicle for employees to be able to speak and have a means, if they don't feel comfortable to speak to their managers, that they can do this anonymously. Oh, I don't know what I did. A little bit of background. The City of Brampton is committed to the principles of accountability and stewardship of public funds. In 2016, Council had approved a fraud prevention policy as well as the approval of the hotline. It was clear to me upon joining the city that there were staff that weren't even aware that there was a hotline, nor were they aware that we had a fraud policy. So I come to Audit Committee, and Audit Committee had endorsed the updated fraud policy, and we, at that point, decided that we were going to relaunch a fraud awareness program for the city. The fraud prevention policy does complement the other policies of the city, such as code of conduct and our IT usage policy. And it's meant to interweave with these other policies. So the policy was approved in March of 2018. It applies to all people employed by the city. And one of the things that I would like to highlight is that there are consequences when fraud has been detected and has been substantiated. Everyone in the city is responsible for their areas and to understand where there could be potential fraud. There should not be any retaliation for anyone that does speak up. The current policy provides significant examples for employees to understand what fraud looks like at the city as well. Our current service provider is Clearview Connects. Clearview Connects has 20 years of experience in this field with a significant number of clients. I also have the CEO of Clearview Connects here, so if you have questions, Phil is right here to answer any questions that you may have. So why did we go through all of this work? Well, we wanted to support the city's culture, where our corporate values of integrity, courage, compassion are supported, where everyone lives these values, where everyone believes in these values, where all employees want to do the right thing, where they feel comfortable to be able to speak up if they see something. So in 2018, 34 fraud presentations were completed. We have gone to, I believe, every department. We've gone to a significant number of divisions, and we've gone to a few all-staff meetings to talk about fraud, the policy, Clearview Connects. One of the things that we do talk about is going to your manager and having a conversation with your manager first. And if you don't feel comfortable with that conversation, to then go and pick up the phone or go online, go to Clearview Connects and make a report. We did a number of fraud articles. November of 2018 was International Fraud Awareness Week. We had a number of articles, a quiz, as well as a poster that was distributed. All new staff that start with the city now have to acknowledge the fraud policy before they can start. We have now completed our SOP with what the process looks like with respect to a fraud investigation. As I had mentioned on March the 5th, March is Fraud Prevention Month. We have been posting articles on our internal intranet, and we still have some more presentations. So we have been reaching out to the various divisions to set up these presentations and again, have more conversations. More material is being developed for Fraud Prevention Month. So I encourage anyone that doesn't know or wants to learn more about fraud to go on. So this is being supported by the Competition Bureau of Canada. There is a lot of material on their website. There is a fraud quiz. It all helps to expand your awareness of what fraud looks like. So my ask to Audit Committee and to Council is that there is a strong and consistent tone at the top, and not just senior leadership, but all councillors support our corporate values, embody our corporate values, and walk the talk of our corporate values for you to endorse the fraud prevention policy and encourage this discussion of if you see something, then say it. And I just have, if you have questions.
Yes, thank you. Members of the committee, are there any questions or comments? Mr. Zuman.
Thank you, Chair Medeiros. And thank you, Farouzan, for your presentation this morning. You know, as you've pointed out, it's a timely topic to discuss the fraud hotline because this is Fraud Prevention Month in March here. And you know, the fraud hotline certainly is an important tool in identifying and rectifying unethical or fraudulent activity when it occurs, right? It's unfortunate. It's not a fault of the tool itself. It's unfortunate that, you know, we're identifying fraudulent activity through this tool after it's already occurred in most instances. But, you know, I've seen other organizations that I've come across in my professional career use other tools to try to build up an ethical culture and prevent unethical conduct from occurring in the first place, right? So I've seen organizations have consistent sort of training programs for their employees on the topic of ethics. I've seen organizations use surveys around employee morale and even some very innovative programs that try to provide support to employees who might be struggling with addiction problems, mental health problems, or financial problems that might leave them more susceptible to perhaps engaging in unethical conduct, right? But these are just examples of various tools that I've seen various organizations use. I think what's important is that there needs to be a coordinated strategy in place within an organization to sort of build up that ethical culture and promote ethical conduct, right? And typically, it has to, as you pointed out, start with the tone at the top, really. I've seen, you know, various organizations use different formats to try to build up that ethical culture. I've seen some organizations that have appointed ethics committees, where they have representation from management or executives from various divisions within an organization, and that helps to build a framework for promoting ethical conduct that is particular to that organization, works for that organization with input from different divisions, right? In other organizations, I've seen the appointment of an ethics executive, typically the senior most member of management within that organization who is really in charge of building up that framework and culture within the organization. And you know what we see in those instances where the buck stops with somebody, there tends to be more accountability in those instances, right? I guess what I'd like to hear a little bit more about from management, and this isn't to put Joe on the spot, you know, under the spotlight or anything, perhaps this can be a more fulsome discussion we can have in future audit committee meetings, is just to perhaps get a sense of if there is some sort of coordinated framework or strategy for promoting ethical culture within this organization, which is the city of Brampton. And if there is such a strategy in place, what are the components to that strategy? What does that strategy look like? And the other thing I'd like to see more from management is, in terms of getting the tone from the top right, is really management taking the lead in building up that framework or environment to promote the ethical culture, and really internal audit playing a support role, whether that's providing training sessions, educational sessions, or operating the fraud hotline, right? So, if you have any insights in that regard, I'm happy to take those now, but really, I think we would all benefit from perhaps some sort of presentation on that topic at a future audit committee meeting and a more fulsome discussion at that point. Thank you, Chair Medeiros.
Thank you very much. I don't know if staff want to provide any comment.
Sorry, through the chair. So one of the things that we're looking at for 2019, so I agree with your comments. There is a lot of literature out there that does show the linkage between a strong culture and fraud in an organization. And you can pretty much Google this and find the metrics that support this. There's also metrics that support in an organization, you have a certain percentage that will always do the right thing, and then you have this middle percentage of people that can be swayed either way depending on the culture of the organization. So a stronger culture will promote the behavior that the corporation is looking for. To that end, we are looking at, so the policy currently requires fraud training, so we're looking at the training materials and being able to deliver that to staff. And we're also looking at having an annual sign-off of the fraud policy. So I believe that these are both mechanisms that will support management's actions. And I have spoken to Joe about coming to the senior leadership and having a very, probably a deeper dive of a similar presentation to them as well. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Through the chair, if I may add to those robust comments. There is no formal framework that is in place currently, but it is one of the more important character traits we do strive to influence and ensure we have within our culture. One of the things we like to say is that we're looking for people and we expect people to act in a way and manner that is not only ethical, but you do the right thing when no one is looking. And that is something we try to exemplify across this corporation. And one of the benefits of the current structure is that, internal audit is one of our partners when we do our work. And it's been quite beneficial to have that kind of relationship to ensure that we're always speaking that kind of language. It's been excellent. And one of the things with Acting Commissioner McIntyre, our plan for 2019, is to bring forward actually a ethical and corporate social responsibility policy and framework. So this is something we can build into it, and I'm happy to bring back to this council. But it is something that is in the background, and we remind ourselves of on a regular basis, but there is nothing formal there. But we will be working on something and bring back.
Thank you very much. Is that fine? Thank you very much. Mr. Ali?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for bringing the presentation. As a public member, I'm very pleased to hear that City of Brampton is also focusing more on the fraud prevention and also creating an awareness among the employees. So, looking at the presentation, the most common form of fraud information is coming through the tips, right? So we have equal responsibility to protect the employees who is also communicating to us. So, do we have some sort of a whistleblower prevention policy to protect the employees, those who are really coming forward to communicate with you and bringing the issues up? And the second question is that the fraud awareness is pretty much focusing on the city employees really coming forward, but are there any mechanism available for the public, the common public, to really, if they find anything about going on and if they hear about, how do they bring that information into the knowledge of the city and the city auditors?
Through the chair, for your first question, our fraud prevention policy actually speaks to whistleblower protection and is very explicit with respect to that. I'm also going to say where I have had conversations of items that have gone into the hotline, I do not share, even if I know the person and we've had a conversation, I don't share that information with anyone. I limit the amount of people that are involved in fraud investigations as well. And all of that is meant to protect the individual who's bringing forward the report. If the report is brought through Clearview, I have no idea who's brought forward the report, so the anonymity is guaranteed through that means. Clearview provides a platform by which we can communicate with the reporter without us knowing who the reporter is. So that has actually been quite helpful as we progress through an investigation if there are further questions, for us to be able to have a conversation and have that anonymity protected. The second part around for the public, currently there is no means for the public to contact the Office of Internal Audit. If there are concerns, I believe they would go through 311. Yes? I believe they would go through 311 and have conversations in that way.
Great. Are there any, yes, Mr. Jan.
Thank you to the chair and to management for the presentation. I appreciate the comments about how important the hotline is to detect fraud. And given the previous lack of staff awareness, I think it's encouraging to see all of the activities that have gone on in just a 9-month period to help create awareness. I'm wondering if there's any metrics that can be used to help track awareness going forward, just knowing that that this has been a challenge in the past, along the lines of a percentage of staff who've been who've seen a presentation in the past year, or anything else that can help us track this as a metric going forward.
Through the chair, so I think there's a couple ways that we can do that. We have tracked all of the divisions in the staff meetings and who would have attended. That's one way, but if we start looking at all of the new employees that have started with the corporation, all of them have to sign an acknowledgement. And as we start working on the piece that there's an annual acknowledgement by staff, that's all done, like it's gonna be electronic through our talent and learning system. So that will be another way for us to be able to track that like who has acknowledged the fraud policy. The acknowledgement, I would say, is separate from awareness, and so it is a bit of a struggle to, I can't every year go and have another presentation, and there's only certain staff that will go online to read articles, and so in terms of traction, that becomes a challenge in how we can sort of push this messaging and the effectiveness of that. So it's something that we're still sort of sitting with and thinking about, but there are some metrics that we can think about with respect to awareness, and we can. Well, I mean, I'm bringing these forward, so as we do the updates, we'll provide that to Audit Committee.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jan. Can I be moved that the chair be heard? Thank you. I guess conversation around ethics and I guess the mantra that you have set out for council when you've asked. Can you speak to, I'm not sure if Peter would be the most appropriate, how does the Integrity Commissioner play in all of this? Because certainly, if I'm not mistaken, the public do have an opportunity if they do feel that there's been unethical action by a councillor, that they can go to the Integrity Commissioner. So that is one form that they can raise that public awareness. Second, ourselves as councillors, we have that mechanism to use for the Integrity Commissioner. So that is sort of a missing piece, and I thought I'd just bring that forward as a benefit to our new colleagues at the committee. So maybe you want to comment on how this all complements each other. Just to speak along that corporation and ensuring ethical behavior here at the city.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So if the Integrity Commissioner is a specific advisor and ethical advisor to members of council, and members of council exclusively, and members of local boards and committees. So if there was, and the current council code of conduct does speak to that type of ethical behavior and may even mention fraud specifically in it. If there presumably was a fraud hotline submission that involved a member of council, some of the conversation would be that maybe some point, depending on the nature of it, that it may go over to the Integrity Commissioner. But if it was a fraud submission that was specific to staff, the Integrity Commissioner has no jurisdiction over that. Then that would be dealt with through the administration.
Great, thank you very much. So if I see no further questions or comments, can I get a mover? Moved by Mr. Zuman, all in favor, carried, thank you very much. Our next item of business is report 5.1. There's a recommendation. Are there any questions or comments? No. Can I get a mover? Councillor Singh, all in favor? Carried. Thank you. Item 5.2, the internal quality assessment review results. to be received. Are there any questions or comments? No, moved by Councillor Bowman. All in favor? Carried. Item 5.3, the status of the management action plans, December 31st, 2018. Any questions or comments? No, moved by, oh, we have a comment here. Mr. Zeman.
Thank you so much. I was actually taking a look at the update over the weekend, and one number sort of stood out for me a little bit over the weekend, which was the 26, which is the number of audit recommendations that management was aiming to address by December 31st, but then it got deferred and management was only able to address 10 audit recommendations by December 31st. You know, I think the only comment I would have is just to encourage management to try to stay on top of addressing the audit recommendations on a timely basis. You know, I know my understanding is it's a function of perhaps some aggressive expectations up front and some staff turnover as well, right? So I would just encourage you to stay on top of that. I know Farouzan in the past has been very outspoken in terms of the support, the fantastic support that she's gotten from city management and city staff in conducting her work and following up on remedial work as required. And I think that's reciprocated as well in terms of the reviews that the internal audit function has gotten from management, right? So my comment would be to continue to work collegially on that because the idea is effective and efficient use of taxpayer dollars, right? And just to try to remediate any audit recommendations on a timely basis the best we can. There are circumstances that come up that are beyond our control, but just would encourage that a little bit.
Thank you, Mr. Zalman. Any comments? No? Great. Okay, so no further comments. Moved by Councillor Paleshi. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Item 5.4, corporate fraud. Oh, we've already dealt with that. Item 5.5, internal audit work plan. Councillor Singh.
Sure, I just have a question. So the projects for 2019, first of all, thank you for bringing this. We had discussed this last meeting as well. For 2019, how are these projects determined? Which ones we're going to pick and focus on?
Through the chair, there's various inputs into the determination. Essentially, it is based on risk. So we have inputs such as the last time the audit was done, the financial significance of the area, management's input, and previous audit findings. So all of these pieces come in. We also look at the overall corporate strategy and put all those pieces together in order to assess which areas should be looked at. Previous to 2019, there were areas in the corporation that had never been audited, and so I felt that those were very important for us to get to. In 2019, we were able to sit back and think about what makes sense for the corporation from a risk perspective that we want to look at. So there are all of those feeders that went into determining the audit plan. The one comment I also want to make is that this is an agile plan, meaning as the risks of the city change, this plan will or may change. And so I don't want committee to be stuck on these are the audits that are for sure going to be done, because we are subject to move these audits around as other items come forward, or if there are other immediate requests of management to look at things that are of higher risk, higher significance from a risk perspective.
Okay. And I just had one question of clarification for one of the projects. I saw contract management, and so looking at building inspection processes. Does that include house inspections in there, particularly in reference to basement apartments?
Through the chair, so I didn't hear what you said.
Sorry, I have a swollen tongue, so I'm not clear as well.
What?
So in one of the projects, there's contract management we're going to be looking at. Would that include basement apartments by any chance?
When we discuss contract management, these are contracts that the city engages third parties to do specific.
Got it.
So
We're
that
talking about
those
third
kind of
party.
contracts,
Okay.
we found in every audit that we've done, that seems to be an area that requires some more management oversight. So to look at contract management from that framework
Yeah.
made sense for us.
Okay,
Okay.
all right, thank you for bringing this forward.
Thank you, Councillor Singh, and I just remind you, if you do have areas of interest and where you think this committee should look at and would like to make amendments to the work plan, you have every opportunity to bring something forth. Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Ali?
Thank you. The work plan and the project identified for 2019, which is much higher than 2018. And I'll also touch upon pretty much, various functions, so which is good to see that it's not focusing on just only one item. It is really covering pretty much various aspects and business functions of this city. And my question is that comparing the number of projects that we are planning to do in 2015, looking at the resources, it is quite achievable with the resources that you have. It's something.
Through the chair, I will happily admit this is a very aggressive plan. I would rather have an aggressive plan and fall short than have a plan that I can easily achieve and exceed performance. I feel like these were the right audits for 2019. And I know that it is aggressive. Having said that, last audit committee will be looking in November, so there will be some overlap for these audits, and I take that into consideration when I do the 19 plan. I feel like I want the team to look at these areas and drive the success. And if we achieve it, then I think that says a lot about what we are capable of. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Ali. Can I get a mover? Moved by Mr. Ali. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Item 5.6, IT Service Test Audit Report. Are there any questions, comments? No. Moved by Councillor Willens. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Item 5.7, Mobile Phone Management Follow-Up Audit Report. Would you like? Yes.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, just clarification that when the presentation was made on the fraud prevention hotline update, committee at that time received the presentation and adopted the staff recommendations in 5.4.
Yes. So duly noted. 5.7, again, any questions or comments? No. Would you like to?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, please, Mr. Ali.
I have one question on that. So what process currently we have when staff are offboarding or leaving to retrieve all their devices and making sure that they are completely disconnected to the network in the city?
So when the audit was done, it was noted that there was an inconsistency in the information that was provided to IT in order for them to effectively offboard staff. So did you want me to answer if they were provided with the information, what the offboarding looked like?
I just want to make sure that we have at least a process in place to make sure that when the staff offboard or exit or leave this corporation, we have a mechanism in place to really disconnect and retrieve all the devices and disconnect them to the city's network.
So through the chair, as soon as IT does find out that there has been an employee that has been offboarded, they do all of the things necessary to disconnect the employee, depending on what they have. So if they have an email or a corporate phone that they would disconnect that person appropriately.
Okay, great, thank you very much. If there's no further questions or comments, moved by Mr. Jen, all in favor? Carried, thank you very much. We go on, there's no new business. Question period. Are there any questions by committee? No. Public question periods, anyone from the public? No. Can I get someone to move us into closed session? Moved by Councillor Santos, all in favor? And let's say we meet in, it's 10:05, can we say 10:10 in 5 minutes? Great. Okay, closed sessions will be up on the 6th floor. So I'll add 10 more minutes. So let's say we start at 10:15, please. 10:15 on the 6th floor boardroom. Thank Thank you. Oniva? Yeah, okay. Thank you, members of the committee. We're back in open session. So I guess to report that we were in camera for an information item. Now, no direction was given. Now we go into, just before we adjourn, I'll pass it over to our city clerk, who I think just wants to touch base regarding our dates of our next meeting.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to members of committee, the next scheduled meeting for the Audit Committee, listed on page 3 of the agenda, is Tuesday, June 11th. And in consultation with the Chief Audit Executive and staff, we are proposing a 1 o'clock meeting, because Tuesday sometimes there's a Committee of Adjustment meeting in these chambers. And the next 2 meetings, because this committee is scheduled to meet quarterly unless there's a requirement to have another meeting at the call of the chair, the next meeting after June 11th would be Tuesday, September 10th at 1 o'clock, and Tuesday, November 19th at 1 o'clock. And subject to the adjournment of today's meeting, the clerk's office will schedule those in your calendars.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And so can I get a motion to adjourn? Moved by Councillor Bowman. Oh, sorry, my apologies. Councillor Paleshi.
Mr. Chair, so I understand we've already approved the item 5.7, and it was sent out yesterday, I believe, by way of email. I guess I wasn't fully paying attention, but I've yet to see the report. So, and I don't believe there was any questions that were asked. I was wondering if it would be okay with committee, we went back and had an overview of that, seeing that we haven't really had time. We received it yesterday. Kudos to the members that read it. I didn't.
So are you suggesting you'd like to reopen this? We would need 2/3 to reopen.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
So we have a motion by Councillor Paleshi to reopen 2/3. All in favor? I believe yes. Okay, so it's reopened. So I believe Councillor Paleshi, you would like Farouzan just to give us a little overview of the report for committee's benefit?
Please, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So Farouzan, I'll hand it to you, please.
Through the chair, the mobility audit was a follow-up audit that was to validate management's actions based on the June 2017 mobility audit that was performed. There was immediate action that was required on that audit. So we reviewed a number of items. Overall, there was some enhancements required. We did see changes in the process from the 2017 mobility process to the current process. What I wanted to highlight was, I'll just go through the findings if that's okay. Management oversight was insufficient with respect to vendor reviews and security reviews. So what we would like to see is ongoing reviews in both of those aspects. With respect to asset management, while management does have an overall perspective of assets, what does not exist is a central listing of assets. And that was a similar finding to the 2017 report. In the report, we not only focus on mobile phones, we also looked at what is the landscape for the corporation. So not just the mobile piece, but also tablets and networking devices, and looking at the growth of those other devices. I believe it was 112% over the year versus mobile phones. And so when we start thinking about what does that look like for the city, having a strategy and having a policy became apparent to us. And so we've suggested that management create and look at a policy and a strategy when it comes to mobile devices. In July of 2018, the Ontario government had renegotiated plan with Rogers. The city leverages that plan. And what that resulted in was a change in the cost for individual users. So what we did was we did a 12-month review, so old plan, new plan, and we looked at the average cost per user. And the change moved from around 20, I'm going to average and say about 20, it was 27 to 29. So we saw that, and as soon as the new plan kicked in, we were sitting at $20. So approximate $8 per user savings per month, which is quite significant. And the plan, because of the increase in data and the inclusion of texting, that's what's resulted in the changes to the costing piece. The plan also had a stacking plan associated for roaming costs. So while an employee is traveling, if, for example, they were in Europe and they used more than 40 megabytes of data, they would go to the next. So if, I'm going to make up some numbers because it's not, I don't have it off the top of my head, but if it was 40 megabytes cost $30, as soon as you go over the 40, you add another 30 and then another 30. And 40 megabytes is not a lot of data. Right? So, I mean, we all recognize that that's not enough. The stacking plan did not provide any alarm, like any you're going over or you've hit this cost. There was no notification. So it would be easy for staff to go significantly over with respect to long distance and roaming charges. So we had identified that and we had asked management to look at what would be a travel package to put on a phone when someone was away. Again, that minimizes the costs to the corporation. One of the changes that management had put in since the 2017 report was the oversight for personal reimbursement. So on a quarterly basis, a report is produced. The report is produced, it's an automated report, but once it's received by management, it is then split into departments and then cascaded down. So our feedback to management was that is a very manual process, and as we increase our usage of technology, this doesn't seem like it would be a good alternative, and we asked management to look at what does automation of that whole piece look like. And on that note, I did want to recognize that this process for personal reimbursement did result in a significant change in the amount that was being reimbursed back to the city. So we were encouraged by looking at those numbers. And as a result of this audit, we will be following up and like looking at the tracking of the expenses as well as the reimbursements. We've asked management to look at some metrics around reimbursements. That's my summary. That's pretty much it.
Great, thank you, Fruzen. Councillor Blushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just on that final comment, Fruzen, when do we expect management to come back then with some figures indicating what those numbers look like?
Through the chair, what numbers?
With respect to reimbursements and
I have, sorry, through the chair, I have some numbers I can share with you. So
It's
we,
just
these were, I
one thing
want to be clear that these were not audited. I just asked management for these numbers, so you'll have to consider me management as I give you this information.
For sure, and
Okay.
with respect, it's one thing to say, you know, we're saving a bunch of money, and I'm sure we are. But the other side, if we're not looking at, if we're not managing that or overseeing that when it comes back to evaluate it, where we're actually, if we're saving money, I was just wondering when that timeline, or if there is a timeline when management would be reporting back to that.
Through the chair, so I'm going to answer each of your questions separately, if that's all right. So for the reimbursements, the new plan that the city leveraged kicked in July the 1st. So finance met with all of the groups in the city and executed on this new SOP for the reimbursement. Q1 and Q2 were provided to management in Q3. So there was a little bit of a lag. And then, so what I asked for was, can you give me the data? Our audit period ended in a way that we weren't able to fully look at the full reimbursements. But for my own knowledge, I wanted to look at what the reimbursements were. So up until July, we were looking at an average of about 100 per month. And once we move, so in September, there was a reimbursement of 709, the total reimbursement was 791, and that was 13 individuals. Prior to that, it would be somewhere between 1 to 3 individuals, averaging approximately $100. Again, these are non-audited, this is non-audited information. Subsequent to September, we're seeing approximately somewhere between $200 to $400 of reimbursement, fluctuating between 5 to 7 individuals. So we're seeing a pattern. Having said that, it's just a preliminary pattern, and what we would want to see is management identifying what metrics would be sufficient to provide oversight on the reimbursement piece. And one of the responses from management is that they will be developing some metrics around the reimbursement piece. So if this is, I'm not sure if you want to come back to, management wants to come back to audit committee for an update, but we will be, on our part, we will be tracking the responses through our management action plan to make sure that these are effective tools around reimbursements.
Okay, and we're good with management coming back to audit committee?
Through the chair, yes, we can do an annual summary recognizing what our auditor had indicated was that on a quarterly basis, we look at these stats and recognizing that there are some thresholds we had put in place in terms of, you know, what gets paid back and when. If we were able to come back at the end of the year to tally saying the number of individuals, the number of dollars that were reimbursed, that would be helpful. Happy to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank
committee.
you, Councillor Pelosi. So now if I can get, motion again to receive the report moved by Councillor Pelosi. All in favor? Carried. And now can I get a motion to adjourn? Moved by Mr. Ali. All in favor? Carried. Have yourselves a good rest of the day.